Hey everyone, and thank you for choosing to watch this video. This is going to be a book haul. I am going to be featuring books I got from the library, books I've bought from the charity shop, and books that I have swapped with other authors. And I think it only right that we begin with those books. Throughout the month of February, in Macclesfield at Christchurch, there was the Macclesfield Book Festival, and this was where a lot of local writers came together to try and peddle our wares. I was there for 3 out of 4 weekends, but I wasn't there the first weekend. I was there the second weekend, which is where I hosted a poetry open mic. I was only there for an hour on the third Sunday, and I was there for both days on the fourth weekend. And the fourth weekend is where I got the majority of these books from. But the first weekend that I was there, for the Poets Weekend, I was situated next to another local poet who is Helen Kay. Basically, this event ended up being more about networking with other writers because there were a few people who came in, but not many, and some of them weren't really that interested in buying our books. They'd come to see the huge selection of secondhand books that were available at Christchurch. However, if you are ever in Macclesfield and the place is open, I recommend going there for the secondhand bookshop that is within this church, and also just for wandering around and hearing about the history of the building, because that was fantastic. Anyway, Helen is a poet who I have mentioned before on this channel, and I said how she writes poetry in a way that I am envious of because it makes me wonder whether I am doing poetry correctly. That's a word I struggle with. And this is her latest poetry collection, which is It Was Never About the Kingfisher. I found this a brilliant poetry collection for the reasons that I generally always like poetry, and I generally like writing and considering the way that stuff sounds. I like the rhythm of things, and I like thinking about the way it's going to hit the listener's ear. This book is just filled with that. It has all of those sound things, those rhythmic things, the accents, the consonants, the alliteration. There's so much within the sound within these poems that I have particularly enjoyed when it came to reading this. And it was one of those first books that I read after a reading slump that got me back into reading. There was also in here a lot to do with nature, which is something that I particularly enjoy, and also some very good character work, getting to know the essence of people through the collection. I thought this was brilliant, superb, and I look forward to rereading it. Helen also gave me a copy of her book Aunty, which is about a relative of hers, but one of my volunteers also happens to know Helen's auntie, and so that book is currently with them. On the fourth weekend of the book festival, I had been looking forward to meeting Paul Mars, and he was there with a few members from his writers group. Paul also has a channel here on YouTube, and he did speak to me, Joy, and John Winkler on the final Saturday of this event. And as with Helen, I ended up swapping books with most of the writers who were there. So firstly, we have Paul's book, All the Rage. I do already own some of Paul's Doctor Who books, and you will have seen me mention in the past the Brenda and Effie series, which I've only read 2 books from that series, but I have been fond of what I've read by him so far. And this is one that he pointed out to me, and I thought, well, you recommended this one, so I will swap this one. And I can't remember what I swapped it for. It might have been Doris. But on the back it says, 2 boys, 2 girls, and a dream of pop stardom. It's 1981 and the nation is going Eurovision crazy. It seems from the back that it's going to be a lot about the 1980s and a band from the 1980s, and we will see how we get on with this one. I can't deny I read about it being about a band, and immediately my mind goes to was it Daisy Jones and the Six that was popular? But Oh, and what was that other one? Opal and Nev, that one. Anyway, looking forward to it. And then as soon as I walked in, Paul said that I might like this book, The Lovely Old Days by David Richards, who was one of the other writers who was part of Paul's writing group. And this one says, murder isn't easy. If it was, everybody would be doing it. Pam and Jean, two no-nonsense ladies of a certain age, have been best friends since school. Apparently, they're going to start murdering folk, which, you know, if that's what you want to do in your spare time, who am I to judge? Then we have The Toy Hospital by Rylan John Cavell. I didn't realise when I picked this book up it was going to mention Christmas, but this says that it is the third story in the Phantasmagorical series, which is a follow-up to Violence and Lavender and Pity the Dead, but I was told that they could be read separately. Honestly, the only reason that I wanted to pick this book up is because, well, firstly, it mentioned Manchester, and now I'm finding out it mentioned Christmas, which are both good things for me. But when the author was describing this to one of the people who was looking to buy books, she looked to be incredibly uncomfortable with that idea. And I liked the idea of being uncomfortable, and also there was just something about the cover that got me. So I swapped this as well. To be fair, I didn't really give the author a choice before I swapped this book. I was kind of just like, we're swapping books and I'm taking this one. And then we have Chains, The Untold Story of Jacob Marley by Ian Wayles. And we all know that A Christmas Carol is one of my favourite books, a book I reread every December. And so whether or not this writer had chosen to swap books with me, they took An Heir to Murder and I took this. I was looking forward to this one. I am considering leaving it until the end of the year and reading this alongside A Christmas Carol, and I'm also thinking now maybe waiting until October time for The Toy Hospital. But these are all the books that I've swapped with other writers for copies of my books. Oh, and also I didn't swap this one, but I was gifted Taste the Bright Moment, and I was gifted this book by Phil Williams at the most recent Poems and Pints, because he left his gloves and I chased him down the road to give him his gloves back, and he gave me this as a thank you. This is a book that contains poems from Cheshire, Shropshire and Staffordshire, because it's an anthology from Keel Poets at Silverdale, and I already know quite a few of the poets who are in here. Phil gave me this book because I know Helen Kay, whose book I just mentioned, but then I also know Caroline Hawkridge and Melanie Amry, among others. So I'm looking forward to getting to that one eventually. Let's move on to the books I borrowed from the library recently. So as we know, the Women's Prize Fiction Longlist got announced, and immediately I went onto my library's website to see what they had that I could order, and two of the books have come in for me to borrow. And so I have The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley, and I have Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. This book here is blurbed by a number of writers whose works I have liked in the past, but it's also blurred by a number of writers whose works I have disliked in the past, and a few booktubers whose reviews I trust have said they didn't like this one. But from what I understand, someone from the past comes to the near future and there might be a little bit of a love story there. Part of me likes the idea of how weird that is. Part of me doesn't like the idea of romance because, you know, I replaced my heart with a bread oven in 2007, so the idea of love just... I'm not about that. But we'll try it. We'll try it. You know, sentences today when you got a dry mouth and not enough tea. But Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell, I'm pretty sure my friend Charlie of Charlie Book Reads has enjoyed this one. I know quite a few people who are liking this, and I have been told that this seems to be the one that a lot of people who are doing the plod-alongs, which are hosted by Charlie and Jem of... What's Jem's book channel? Well, I'll link them in the description anyway, but the people who are following the plot along, this one seems to be the one that is getting the most buzz and people are enjoying the most. So I'm looking forward to it, despite the fact that it is incredibly dark subject matter. And then, I don't have it here because I've already returned it, but I borrowed The Crow Trap by Cleeves. My friend Joy is currently really enjoying Cleeves and keeps reading them. And so now that I've read The Crow Trap, I've got the second sit in the Vera series, which is Telling Tales. And a few weeks ago I read, or was it last week? Anyway, I read A Bird in the Hand, which was Anne Cleeves' very first book. And so I've got the sequel, Come Death and High Water, which I'm currently reading. These are a bit more cosy than the Vera Stanhope series. And the author admits herself that the writing isn't on a par with how she's writing nowadays, but that makes sense. It's at the very beginning of her career. And these are a retired civil servant, and the crimes generally so far have involved bird watchers. Now, let's move on to the books that I have got from the charity shop. Now, these have been acquired over a great length of time. It's just I decided to share them with you today. So firstly, we have Poetry Please, which is 100 popular poems from the BBC radio programme. I originally decided I was going to get this and have the idea to read a poem a day. I liked how it was illustrated, and I thought that it would be good for me to experience poems that I might not have seen before. I was also planning on leading a workshop at the writers group and thought that I could maybe use something from this. I bought it, I put it down in my room, and I've not touched it since, but there you go. I then have How to Fly in 10,000 Easy Lessons by Barbara Kingsolver. This is her poetry collection, and so far I've read the first one, which is How to Drink Water When There Is Wine, and I have absolutely no idea what the author was getting at, but maybe as I go on, I will understand her poetry a bit more and find something that appeals to me. One book that did appeal to me, even though it's a children's book, is There's an Awful Lot of Weirdos in Our Neighbourhood by Colin McNaughton, and this is subtitled A Book of Rather Silly Verse and Pictures. There are some poems in here that are very of the time. I say that because it's about smacking children or beating people to get them to do what you want them to do, and I was a bit like, oof, I don't think that would get published nowadays. This book was originally released in 1987, but this edition came out in 1997. So was probably around when I was at primary school or infant school, 1997. I was 5. So I probably would have seen this then, and maybe there's a bit of nostalgia for it that's got me to pick it up. But I have enjoyed just reading some of the poems to people, and yeah, it's been a good one. I've enjoyed just flicking through it every now and then. And then I've got a second copy of a book that I only donated to the charity shop last year, and to be fair, this is in a better condition than that one was. Well, this is The Stand by Stephen King. This book is 1,325 pages long. It hurts my hands to hold this book. And the reason I've got this is because I was talking to somebody and they said that this was one of their favourite books and ought to be read. And so I was like, okay, if I see it, I'll get it. And then the next day at the charity shop, somebody donated it. And I was like, okay, was this some sort of sign from the universe? Do we believe in signs from the universe, or did it just happen because it was a coincidence? I don't know, but I haven't got any plans to read this incredibly soon. I'm pretty sure it's Stephen King's take on a vampire novel, but I don't know. If anybody could tell me, that would be great. All I can see is about a plague, dreams of the Prince of Evil, and an apocalypse looming. I can't remember whether I showed this book before, but I might have done. My friend Joy gave me some books to donate to a charity shop, and she said I could go through them first and take what I wanted. And so I got Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner. I also had Victory City by Salman Rushdie from that, so maybe I did mention this before. But basically, this is a book from 1926 in which this woman, who's a bit of a spinster, decides that she's just going to uproot herself and enter into witchcraft. And apparently Joy rather enjoyed this story, and because it's so slim, I thought I'd get it and give it a read too. I then have the new selected poems of Kaliane Duffy. Similar to the Poetry Please book, I thought I might be able to read these and do something, create some sort of workshop for the writers group based on them. Kaliane Duffy is a writer whose work I've begun to appreciate more as an adult. I didn't previously go anywhere near her work because of having to read her for GCSE, and I began to get this idea that she could only be read in this scholarly, you had to unpick everything within the poem to read her. And then I started going to the writers group, and I found out a lot of people didn't read Kaliane Duffy doing any of that sort of thing, and they just read her to enjoy her. And so when I saw this, I thought, I'll get it, I'll give it a go, and I'll see what I think. This next book wasn't from the charity shop, I just found it at the bottom of the list. That wasn't a list, it was a pile. Is The Wager and the Bear by John Ironmonger, and I was sent this by Fly on the Wall Press. This is one of their books for free in exchange for a review, and I have not done that yet. But I really like the cover, I really like the idea behind the story. It seems to be a climate change novel. I'm looking forward to finally getting the chance to sit down and read this one. Unfortunately, it came just at the beginning of a reading slump, and I haven't gone near this yet. But once I'm back to reading at full pelt, this will be one of the first books I get to. I then got The Clothes They Stood Up In by Alan Bennett. One, because it's incredibly short, but also because I hadn't heard of this before. Alan Bennett is a writer whose work I really appreciate, mostly from Talking Heads. I'm always interested to see what he's going to write outside of that. Usually I think he's very good at capturing people, and I enjoy the rhythm within his sentences, so I'm looking forward to this one. Then, because I read Glyph by Alice Smith and enjoyed it, and this was a new copy donated to the shop, again, I have acquired another copy of How to Be Both by Alice Smith, and one day I'm going to read this darn book. I keep getting it, I keep giving it away. This time, I think I'm just going to keep it on my shelf until the feeling comes to read it. Because prior to reading Glyph, I watched a review of that book, and someone said that was the only Alice Smith book they'd ever properly enjoyed. And I know I've enjoyed more by that writer. You know, there have been as many I've liked as I've disliked. And then I have 3 books by Mary Stewart. And these have been described as romantic thrillers of the 1950s. So I have Thunder on the Night, Wildfire at Midnight, and Madam Will You Talk. I think this is the one that I picked up first. And all of them seem to be books from the 1950s where people are, well, women mostly, are struggling in relationships, but then they find something dark. Like here, Charity's dream holiday turns into a nightmare when she becomes embroiled in a murder attempt, and she finds herself falling in love with a suspected murderer. Somebody's entered a convent here, but then there's some sort of intrigue in trying to find that person. And a vicious murder happens in this one. And I don't know. As we know, I've been enjoying reading female writers from this era. And so when I saw these 3 come into the shop, I thought I'd definitely give them a go. And then we have the first Inspector Allen mystery, which is The Man in the Queue by Josephine Tey. No, it's not. This is Inspector Alan Grant. Honestly, Inspector Allen is somebody else entirely. This is Inspector Alan Grant. And this is the first novel, The Man in the Queue. And I think it says here that this was originally published in 1929. The reason I got this is because I want to explore more classic crime, especially with writing books that are in the crime genre. I think that it only right to try and educate myself more about what has come before. And, you know, I've done Agatha Christie, but there were so many other people writing at that time that I think it only right for me to read them as well. Finally, them's the books. I just recorded a wool gathering video, and I went on as much in that video as I have talking about all of these, but it's now done. Thank you for sticking around and hearing about these books. If there are any that you would recommend I prioritise over others, then let me know in the comments. Also, if you have any thoughts about them, then let me know them as well. That is perfectly okay. I hope that you got something out of this video. even if it was just something to do whilst you sorted out your taxes, because until next time, that is all.